Good afternoon. In this video, we're going to explore some options for credit card clearing inside SAP ByDesign. This is part of our enablement series to teach you how to better use SAP ByDesign in your organization. And what we're going to cover today is some challenges that we find a lot of our clients have when having company credit cards. SAP ByDesign does not have a credit card clearing system or a way to easily clear credit card transactions or import them into the system for clearing. You may be aware of the open item management feature inside the GL accounts and using general ledger clearing accounts. But there are some challenges with that feature in that you don't always have to load a clearing identifier code, and that makes that feature problematic in some ways. So in this session, we're going to look at a solution where we're going to be using a different approach. But the main challenge here is that our clients typically, if employees have company credit cards, they don't always have the associated paperwork when they're trying to process the credit card payment. Sometimes the transactions, how they're going to be coded, are obvious to the accounts payable user. Other times they have to potentially chase down employees to find out the details on where to code it. So oftentimes it's small dollars but high volumes. So it would be ideal if there was a way to upload it. It would be ideal if there was a way to have these transactions sort of sitting pending in a subledger. Whereas a GL clearing account does not really allow true matching of transactions, except maybe externally in Excel. So the option we're going to show you today is taking a CSV file, which may look something like what you're seeing up on the screen. Typically, it just has a transaction date, a very generic description that indicates the vendor, and then the dollar that's being cleared out. And that description may or may not be useful to the AP person to understand how to code the transaction. So in the solution today, we're going to look at using a standard supplier as the credit card clearinghouse, where we load all the transactions into that single supplier. We obviously don't want to set up suppliers for every single vendor that the credit card accesses, but just one to load all these transactions through. We're going to use an AP upload to generate the credit card transactions. That's through ByDesign's accounts payable Excel template. We're going to post the transactions once costing details are collected, meaning that we do not have to post the invoice at the same time we load it. So we can have the invoice essentially sitting in limbo until that information is tracked down by the AP staff. And we're going to show you a way to match and clear against the bank statement for your full final credit card payment each month. So there's a couple of configuration elements for this. You are going to want to set up a supplier for the credit card transaction import. Ideally, one, potentially depending on your business scenario, you could set up a supplier for each credit card. You may want to look at the volume of transactions you'll potentially be loading, the number of credit cards that you have. We'll show you the mechanisms how this works, so you could decide after this video if it makes sense for you to have a separate supplier for each credit card. If there is a long delay in tracking down those reconciliations from different people, there could be some advantages to that. There's an additional option for our test here. We've just used the standard domestic accounts payable as the credit side for this transaction. You could create a new GL account for credit card clearing on your balance sheet, and then create a GL determination and tie that to this supplier, so that this transaction would essentially debit the expense and credit card clearing. And then when you do your bank reconciliation, it would clear that account. So that option could be useful if there is maybe a significant timing situation between when your credit card is paid and seeing it sort of sitting in accounts payable versus a credit card clearing account on your balance sheet. Other than that, no more configurations really inside ByDesign. You will need to download the AP Invoice Excel template. You can use the one from the SAP, from your product website. We're also happy to share the one that we are using in this video if you want to use that as a guideline. And then you can just update it per your company specific information. And then other than that, you're going to want to make sure that you understand the GL cost coding for each transaction. That's going to be part of the work that you do on the spreadsheet, really. And will you indicate this on the template, or will you update it later in AP? Meaning, if you don't know where that transaction is going to be booked, you can load the invoice as unposted. Do you want to set up a different GL account for sort of pending credit card transactions? That's another option you can potentially do. So we're going to go in now and have a look at how this transaction would look in the system. Just as an example, sort of the finished product, what we're going to have is a single credit card supplier, or as I mentioned, you could have one for each credit card. So I've got my supplier here, I've got my document number, I've got my, my amount, and if we were to go in and look at that transaction, it's coded to, my description is restaurants, and it's coded to my meals GL account and to this particular cost center. So all of this coding happened through work that was done in between getting the CSV file from your credit card provider. So let's have a look at that and see how that process is going to work. So when you get your file, as you saw in that previous graphic, you probably just have a couple of columns of information that are really useful to you. We're going to take that information and we're going to put it in an Excel template that's adapted for loading into ByDesign. If you want to download that template inside your supplier invoice query screen, you can click on the New button and you can choose Import from Microsoft Excel. Once you do that, the system is going to upload to your browser and to your hard drive a copy of an Excel file, which is pre-formatted and pre-developed for loading into SAP. And the file looks something like this. The file is quite large and it looks fairly complex, but once you understand the mechanics of it, it's not too bad. But I would say the major challenge with this file is a single invoice has to be loaded on a single line, meaning that each row of this file, for example, if I were to put data into row 7 and 8 here, we would be loading 2 invoices. If you do want to load multiple lines to an invoice, these sections in the brown are where you load the rows of the invoice, and these go across the columns. So in order to load row 1, you have to complete the data related to row 1 that is necessary. And then if you want to load row 2, you would have to go all the way over to the far right here to get to that data for this row 2, and then populate that information. So as a result, manipulating your CSV file into a format where it's coming transactions down the rows into across the columns is probably going to be a headache for you unless you are an expert at Excel macros. So our recommendation is to load every single CSV row, so every credit card transaction, as its own invoice in the system, and that invoice will be coded to a single expense account. So that's where you would get the template for this training session. We've already taken a template and populated it for you. We're happy to share this template with you. These document IDs, this is left blank when you're first loading it. I've went and color coded this myself after the fact. So any field here that is in white is information that is probably static, and you can just leave it in your template, and depending on the number of rows you have each month to load, you can just copy down this information as needed. Any field that is in the red is data that you would pick up from the CSV file. So there will be a date for all your transactions, so you can put that in here. Maybe we'll work with June 1st. We'll pretend that this is the June data. And I'll use these values that are already in here, but you would copy this in from your CSV file. And then you would copy in your descriptions, which will probably assist you with your coding. And then if you go across to the brown area here where you have to populate the row information, once again, all these fields in white, you could leave them alone. I'm putting that same description as the row description. I'm copying the value, so we're gonna have one row with the same value. And now you get to the fields that are orange colored, And this is where the AP user is going to have to enter or essentially code the document. So in here, they will put the GL account information, and they would put in the cost center information. And depending on how your system is configured, in my system, GL account is a GL determination. Your system may have a GL account number. So you'll see that when we load this, that'll become clear what that means. And then a note on the tax. As far as the tax is concerned, if you're a US client, then chances are you could just load this as non-taxable and just load the net amount of it to the expense account. If you are loading expenses from another country like Canada or Europe, you potentially have tax credits to consider. And then in that case, you may want to break out the tax on this document so that the tax is coded properly. And if you do have use tax, you could take advantage of the use tax codes as well. So if you're wondering where this tax code ID comes from when you are creating a supplier invoice, and you're on the row, this is your tax code. So non-taxable, which is what I'll do for this test, is 1, but you could do use tax, you could do sales tax if you want to actually break out tax on your invoice. I mentioned that GL code as well. So the GL account in this demo environment is an alphanumeric sequence. And so that's what I have to populate in there. So once you've copied in all of that information, the last thing you're going to want to do is determine a transaction number. And I recommend you come up with some sort of an intelligence and create a sequence like I've done here. So let's say that this file was my file from May. So you can see it's Visa, year 20, period 5, transaction 1, 2, 3, 4. So each month I could go in, just copy in my new data, and I'm going to update this and make this the June Visa statement. And there's a few different ways you could do this. You could define and replace, or you could do it like I'm doing it here and just drag down and it'll auto increase your numbers like I have. So either method works, but you do need to make sure that you have a unique number on each row because this does become your document ID, which is a duplicate checked field in the system. So you will get warnings and errors if you try and import multiple AP invoices to the same supplier with the same invoice number. So this invoice number is your own intelligence, and you could follow a common philosophy like this or develop your own. So once you've updated the template, the next objective is going to be to connect this template to SAP. So I assume you will have already downloaded the SAP Business ByDesign add-in. If you're doing journal voucher uploads, you probably have that add-in installed. So the connection works the same way that the journal voucher connection works. So you have a log on button and a log off button. So when it's red, you're logged off, and you would just make sure that your URL matches the environment that you're loading into, and then just put in your username and password. And once you're connected, you will see you have a green connection button here, and you know that you are connected to the server. And if you're satisfied with the way your file looks, you can use the save data to. And then we're just going to give this a moment for the system. You'll see a green progress bar as it tries to upload these documents into the system. So once it's loaded, you should get a confirmation window pop up with any warnings or telling you that it was successfully uploaded. So we can go into ByDesign and let's have a look for those invoices. So I'm going to go to my supplier invoicing, invoices and credit memos. And if you do have a lot of documents in the system, you're going to want to create a query for that. So for example, I've created a query here called credit card loading. So it's just bringing up all of my credit card transactions that require posting in the system. And if we want to go in and investigate these, we can see that this matches my file. So here is my travel agent record. So this comes from that record there. And there's my $660. I think I just accidentally added a row there, so I'm going to remove that. And then in this case, I was just sort of sloppy for my test, so I coded everything to the same GL account. But in your case, so here's where the GL account is. You now would have to determine what is your business solution for coding these documents. So for example, the AP user probably looks at that credit card statement, and quite a number of those transactions they're able to code just by knowing the vendor. So if they see that it's Staples, or they see that it's a recurring credit card charge for employee lunches or something like that, they could go ahead and code all of those transactions themselves. They could also potentially be waiting on that transaction until they have to chase down sort of the credit card holder and find out what the exact expense relates to. So that process is completely up to you to determine. So if that information is known when they're doing the Excel spreadsheet, they could put in the proper GL account. Because this is a non-posted invoice, it can be updated here as well. You could choose to import all of these to a temporary GL account. That is completely up to you. So for example, if I do want to change this to a travel-related account, I can make any change that I want in the system. And whenever I'm ready, I can post that document in the system. And you can see I'm getting some duplicate warnings because of my because I've been doing some testing before this training, but that document has now posted in the system. So if we go back to our queries here, we have a query for all of our credit cards. I've just queried that one supplier. Let's do a query on posted transactions for that same supplier. So here we can see that that transaction was posted in the system successfully, and so now we will have financial impact. In the case of transactions where you're waiting for the document for additional information to come in, you have a few different options here. So you can leave this as a ready for posting transaction. You could update comments, potentially as a reminder. Bob, what is this for? So however you sort of want to manage that. And then as you close out those transactions throughout the period, you can post them inside the screen like I just did, or you can use the Shift key and you can mass select transactions and you can post them all at once. So that choice is completely your own. So we've created transactions now that are sitting against this supplier. The supplier was created very simply with a generic name called credit card clearing. As I mentioned before, you could have a supplier for each credit card depending on how you want to set that up. And then I just configured the financial tab to associate it with whichever legal entity I want to do my offset to, and whatever GL account. So as I mentioned earlier, you could optionally create a specific account determination and tie this to a credit card clearing account if you aren't going to be able to clear this off of your payables in time for your month end and you want that to show up on your balance sheet differently. So once again, that's an optional configuration. And then last but not least, let's talk a little bit about how you would reconcile this out of your bank. So I'm not going to get too much into the mechanics of the bank reconciliation. I'll assume that you know how that works. So when you go into your liquidity management and go into your bank statements, you would import your bank statement for your next period. And it would be sitting here looking something like this. I'm just going to go into this one. We're going to walk our way through it. And you would probably, in this tab, you would have a specific item. Sorry, it would be in your create and edit items. You would have an item sitting here, like credit card payment, that would have come in from your bank file. Or you could do the manual method and you could create the item like I have done here. But now you just need to clear out this essential credit card payment where the money has come out of your account to pay Visa or MasterCard. So you would just click on the further processing required. make sure you're on your customer supplier tab, put in that credit card supplier number or name. So there's our credit card clearing. And then you would have all of your transactions. And because you've built some intelligence in here for your period, you would be able to find the transactions that relate to your specific period. And just highlight all of those. And then the transactions that you've loaded off your CSV file should obviously match what the bank has taken out of your account. So you want to make sure that your open amount here is 0. So once you've done that, you would hit your save button. And by posting this bank statement, you would then have a movement from the AP liability account to your true cash account, showing that all of those credit card payments have cleared. So that's the entire process for the credit card clearing using a supplier, a clearing account supplier. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to your VistaView executive, and we'd be happy to provide you more information. Thank you very much for your time.